That is a fact.
Perfect.
All right, I'm reading the opening 10 pages or so here.
Amazing.
Chapter 1 of Invisible Boy, Circus, or the boy who wore a very loud hat. I don't know where I came from, but I remember craving something sweet. So I stopped at the coffee shop on my way home. I must have been about 16. I drove down in my black Toyota Echo, but I left there feeling 8 or 9 years old. I was standing in line for a donut, or 6 donut holes in a box, when an elderly white woman turned around, saw me behind her, and shouted out, "Little black waif." She said each word sharply, with beats in between, loud enough for everyone to notice. The room fell so silent I heard my tinnitus, the ringing that starts when the world goes away. One moment I stood in a long line of people. The next, I was locked in a liminal space with a stranger whose hatred immobilized me. It felt like the power went out in the building, but I couldn't breathe, just as I couldn't see, and I found myself wondering, how do I move? So I knew that the power had only gone out from my body. And then it was over. The elderly white woman's partner laid hands on her lovingly, graciously, leading her back to the counter to order a Dutchie, a cruller, and 2 double doubles. I looked around at the tables, hoping that the woman was shouting at somebody else, and I saw that it couldn't be anyone else, and the rest of the coffee shop's customers already knew that. I felt every pair of eyes identify me, the weight of the white gaze descending, impressing upon me, imagining who might this little black waif be, and where did he come from, and what did he do to provoke this poor woman? But interest in me faded quickly, and suddenly I disappeared, as though nothing had happened to anyone. No one saw anything. The power of their denial teleported me outside. One minute I was there, and then I wasn't. I was simply whisked away, as if by magic. When I got home without any donuts, my white family wouldn't believe me. I must have misheard or done something wrong, they insisted, and 5 sets of cynical eyes took me back to the scene of the crime. Let's go through it again. My mother, who micromanaged all that I imagined, suggested that somehow I'd shown disrespect. It felt like she wanted to blame me. I wanted to help her, but nothing I could think of would explain the old lady's explosion. I didn't jump the queue. I didn't fail to hold the door. The woman was in front of me. I didn't stand too close. I didn't dance or curse. I didn't try to snatch her purse. She was probably demon possessed, said my mother, who saw the devil everywhere. But even this failed to account for the outburst. What was it about me that so offended her evil spirit? And why would it suddenly erupt right there in the coffee shop? And why, if my mother's suspicions were true, would the Lord leave me so unprotected? What was I wearing? I wonder now. I don't recall. I've lost sight of myself over time. My day-to-day style that particular summer was Hawaiian print, mostly, so maybe the loudness offended the woman. But it could have been Sunday, and then I'd be dressed up for church. Who could be bothered by church clothes? A demon-possessed sort of person, perhaps. Maybe my mother was right, and the incident wasn't about race at all. I was adopted. I began in Vancouver, British Columbia, the westernmost province of Canada, cut from my birth mother's womb in July 1985. She was 15 or 16 years old, in foster care then, just a wayward black youth who engaged in premarital sex with the star of her high school soccer team. He was a white kid. His family was German. Keeping this biracial baby was out of the question, but so was abortion. The families were Christian. Surrender was all but imposed on the mother. She had little say in the matter. She took me to term, and they took me away, born to no one, a ward of the Salvation Army's Grace Hospital. 11 days later, the paperwork cleared. A wealthy white couple arrived to collect me. They didn't take me far. The city of Abbotsford is an hour's drive east into the Fraser Valley, named for the river that emerges there from the canyons at sea level. The fertile region is rich with raspberries and religion and is derisively nicknamed the Bible Belt of British Columbia on account of its many churches. In Abbotsford, the largest Fraser Valley community, There are nearly 100 congregations, one for every 1,000 residents, and the nickname is a point of pride. If this is the Bible Belt, pastors would say, then Abbotsford must be the buckle. The mostly white suburb, which borders on Washington State, is also the site of the only recorded lynching in Canadian history. The 14-year-old victim, a Stolo boy named Louis Sam, was hung from a tree by a mob of Americans dressed as his people 101 years before my arrival and just down the road from my house by the mini golf course. But I didn't know that then. Abbotsford's history never came up. We were starting from scratch. I was raised in a vacuum, brought up between bed sheets, educated at home from grade 4 to grade 12 through a Christian curriculum published in Florida. Some children thrive on independent study. For me, a Black adoptee cut off from my community and trapped in an all-white cocoon, it meant finding my way with no context for my situation, no sense of shared struggle or circumstance, and no contact with those who could help me to see what I needed to see to make sense of the world. In a roundabout way, my white family created me, for all creation stories begin with a separation. They gave me a new name. They gave me a language that limited how I envisioned myself. They told me that I was delivered, not into the arms of a woman who loved me, but out of the darkness. My creation was sinful. 2 sinners had sinned. That's how I was made. That's what I was. And sin makes God sick to his stomach. He can't even look at it. But somehow he saw me, they said, and he gave me to them. I believed them, and so I was saved. I became born again. Thereafter, I came to imagine my blackness as proof of my brush with the fires of hell. What a relief to escape with the skin of my teeth. Stop there.
Mute myself here. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. And I mean, your readers and listeners here might not know that I actually got to read some of this as it was in process, which was really wonderful. And I felt like, maybe you can correct me, some of the insights that are in this book were sort of coming out in real time as you were writing it. And I feel like that's a scary, unpredictable journey to be on as an author. Can you talk about that? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, in addition to writing this book, which meant, learning how to write a book like this and how to structure it and, just kind of, how to deliver all the words I promised I would deliver when I signed this book deal. I really felt like I had to just tighten up my politics. I had to, make some sense of what I believed before I could bring a book like this into the world. And I felt like I was going to face, some pushback because people don't typically do this. We don't, adoptees don't generally write stories saying that, hey, this was a bad experience. We're called ungrateful, or we just seem bitter, or what have you. I knew that there would be questions and there would be some controversy, at least from my own parents. And I really felt like I needed to prepare myself completely, not just get myself ready to share my story and go to therapy and, get used to being on display a little bit, but making sure that I'm ready to debate somebody. And I have an answer to some of the questions. The story I planned to tell was raising, what do you think of adoption really? What do you think of transracial adoption? Do you think, I don't know, religion should be abolished? Just huge questions that I knew were coming. And, I wanted to have an answer. If somebody asks me, and don't you dare ask me if I think religion should be abolished. I want to have something to say, So I did a lot of reading. I started with Baldwin, which is kind of where I started in the book as well. And I moved to Bell Hooks, and I moved to Sadia Hartman, and pretty soon I was really into Frantz Fanon. And then, I talked to somebody about Frantz Fanon that I met at the grocery store. And then he recommended Calvin Warren and Sylvia Wynter, and just kind of went on and on and on. And, I devoured everything, and I found myself getting more militant and angrier, and just kind of more. I had more conviction as I wrote this story, and that's what the journey is for Harry, for young me in the book, and it was happening in real time. I think that I started this process as just a good liberal, who was hoping to get more liberal every day. And, by the end of it, I just wanted to kind of, throw over all the tables and say, all of these political parties are bunk. And, we need to abolish capitalism, and we need to, end these countries. And we should certainly stop adopting kids out to white families. And, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe I don't even necessarily need just transracial adoptees. I was mad. And you, I think, can tell. I mean, you can definitely tell, because you were reading these just getting more and more fiery each chapter as I sent it to you. But I think that anyone reading this book will be able to tell that the author is being radicalized at about the same rate as his subject.
Well, it's more clear too. You just have a much more crystal clear understanding of what little Harry saw and what you see now. It's something to behold. Okay, so a less courageous author might have waited to a little bit later in life to write a book like this about adoptive parents. Maybe it came across in that little excerpt. Maybe people will have to read a little further ahead to understand why it's like a less than flattering depiction of your adopted family.
Yeah.
Why did you push through that? Why did you write this now?
I wrote this now in large part because it was ready. It felt like every other time that I tried to write this book, I didn't really, like, I hadn't grown enough. I hadn't, wrapped my head around some of the ideas that I wanted to share. And I also I hadn't really faced what had happened to me. It was during the writing process that I sat up one day and thought, oh, I was abused, and then the next day I talked to my therapist and I said, well, when you faced abuse like I had, she stopped me like, so you've never used that word. We've been talking for a while. How'd you get there? And I got there just by looking at all of this and by having kids and thinking about doing some of these things to them, and not considering it, but thinking about how fucked up that would be. So I just realized, well, I wouldn't tie them to a chair and make them eat dinner. I wouldn't spank them 17 times in a row. I wouldn't do any of the stuff that was done to me. And I realized that's because I'm not an abusive father. So I really was just, I was kind of growing in my awareness of what was going on as I was writing this book. And I just decided, like, this is the story I've always wanted to tell, and it's the one I keep coming back to, and it feels ready now. And you can have your ideas and you can kind of fight your way through them, and maybe you get to the end of them. But what I'm really looking for is an idea that I'm so obsessed with that I'll finish it. I remember James Baldwin said, I'm gonna quote James Baldwin all the time because he's my hero. That he couldn't write anything else until he wrote "Go Tell It on the Mountain," which was a real inspiration here. And I just thought, like, yeah, that's absolutely it. I want to write other stories that are sillier and less sad, and maybe have some whimsy and more than more than just
There's whimsy in there.
I mean, there is.
Right.
Yeah, I want to do those things, but what I need to do first is tell the truth about my own life. And it was scary, and it took a long time for me to decide to do that. And I worked in journalism for 10 years because I would much rather tell other people's stories than tell the truth about my own. And eventually, it was just time. And I'm not going to wait for people to die. I'm not hiding from anybody. I am demanding the right to tell this story and tell it the way that I want to tell it. And I feel like the people that I want in my life are the people that will understand how important that was to me, and why I really had no other choice.
And how are you feeling about your adopted family potentially reading this? Are you worried about the reaction?
Oh yeah, I am. And again, I'm trying to get over that, because I made this choice and I want to I want to stand behind it. But I mean, like, these are my abusers, right? It's hard to speak out about anyone who mistreated you, especially when you've had the racialized experience that I have. I'm sure that I know that a lot of people can identify with that. And so it's scary. It's scary to know what they'll say. I feel like I can talk a real big game here about being strong and courageous and brave. But the reality is that if my adoptive dad or adoptive mom kicked in the door here, like, what did you do? I mean, I feel like I try to hide the webcam.
I hope that would go well for you.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, yeah, we'll cross our fingers that it all goes smoothly for you.
Yeah. Come what may. I've decided. I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I don't want other adoptees to be afraid to tell their own stories. I don't know. If there is a negative reaction from some corners, that's fine. But I did it already. It's too late. So, I'm doing politics and prose now. It is over. Can't be mad.
Famous last words.
I'll give you an apology if you really want, but I did this. And, if it moves us forward, that would be amazing. And if I have spoken to my family for the last time, I've been there before, and I got over it. So I think I'll be okay.
Wow. Okay, so when you talked about that idea that you were just so obsessed with and had to just get done, what was that what do you want readers to sort of take away in terms of the central theme and thought that was, had you hooked for so many years?
Yeah. I feel like every time I talk about when I started writing this book, at least in my mind, I go further and further back in time. When I was 13, 14, I felt like my parents weren't getting what I was saying, and I'd say, no, Mom, Dad, look, this is what it's like. And they'd say, oh, you're playing a race car. Oh, you're making that up. Or, well, that's discounting how arrogant you were. So you can understand why, that guy punched you. Okay, well, I guess maybe I am a big piece of shit, but I still do feel like maybe my race plays a role here. They weren't getting that. So, I've always been a writer. There were a few times that I went up to my room and I thought, well, I'm just not explaining myself clear enough. And I would sit down and I would write these little manifestos that just kind of, explained what I thought that they were missing. And I would leave them lying around. Hey, I just wrote a little something. It's just there on the table. If you want to take a look at it, it's no big deal. And they never really looked at it. One time, my mom was like, I got your little letter, Malcolm X. And I felt like just a big idiot.
Oh my God.
I didn't keep that. I didn't put that in the book because, I swear I was trying to go easy on it. That was my first brush with this. I thought, okay, well, clearly I came at it too black, and that's why that didn't go well. And, so I spent the next 7 or 8 years, really trying to get rid of as much of my blackness as I could. And the new manifestos were not, they weren't any better received. But, as I wrote that, I also thought, there's a lot else that I want to say, and there are, lots of stories I want to tell. And frankly, I'm sure that my mom isn't the only mom who does not understand how important it is for me to be seen as a person, or for their child to be seen as a person. I'm sure that there are lots, and now I know, there are lots of other transracial adoptees who are going to read this book, and instead of being like, oh my God, are going to say, and this has already happened, like, yeah, that's exactly what it's like. I know that there are other people who need this book and have thought, I wish that I could write this book, but I know it will happen. And I just wanted to do it. So I don't even really entirely remember what the question was, but it's maybe.
I mean, yeah, just what was that driving idea that you wanted people to take away? I think you got it. I think we covered it.
I wanted people to understand and understand too that, being Black is not, it's a different reality, and it doesn't, sometimes that's cool. But for the most part, and especially if you're in an all white space, it sucks. No one is acknowledging that you live in this different reality. I'm here in the room with you guys, but somehow it just feels like I'm not. And, I've spent most of my life trying to put that into words. And this is my first attempt. We'll see how many more.
I mean, yeah, it seems like your reality was just denied for so long. Like it was just not, and that was because, your parents were white and, obviously, you find that identity comes from your parents. And to just miss that whole dimension of it just does seem like this terrible position for, your younger self to be living in. And I guess, do you extend from that the idea that, transracial adoption just is never going to work? Like what are your ideas sort of around it? Is it ever right? Is it ever good? Or is that just always cutting off a huge reality?
Yeah, that's just a huge question, right? There's my most powerful statement on adoption in the book. Across the board, I say adoption is not necessarily good. And that was because I really chickened out. I wanted to say something, just more fiery, but I kind of envisioned the backlash. And I chose instead for an oblique reference to Jenny Hadrian Will's older sister, not necessarily related. I think that transracial adoption is just a bad idea. And it's crazy to say. I know that there are lots and lots of loving families who have adopted Black children and are doing their best and are growing and are learning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that kids should be with their families. It's not even. And this is kind of what happened is I started with, white folks do not understand all the realities of being Black enough to raise me, or other Black children. So we can start there. But, the reality is when I met my mom, it wasn't just that she was Black that changed my life. It was that she was me, she looked like me, but just wearing a different hairstyle. She moved like me. Her eyes darted around. She needed to be doing something with her hands at all times. So I just I knew her so completely, and I was such a puzzling child to my adoptive mother that it was kind of infuriating to meet somebody who just would have provided all the context for why I am this way. I think that that's such a huge part of the human experience, being able to see yourself reflected in your community, in your family, in your house. and to know where you came from, and to have people who have been through what you've been through by your side, offering you wisdom, giving you strategies, telling you what to watch out for. There's just so much that you lose when you take a child away from their family, especially their mother. Like babies know their mom's voice when they're born, and then we're gonna act like adoption isn't a trauma. Like, we know that it is. Like, those things just, well, so this baby knows one person when they're born, and then that person is just gone. And then, I mean, you talk to adoptees, and I mean, across the board, we all just kind of self-report a strange feeling of loss we can't place. I don't know what it is. It's something. There's a lot that goes into that. So, where I've landed now, and I continue to grow and learn, and like, I don't know, don't listen to me, I'm just a guy. But where I've landed now is yeah, no, adoption is not good. Let's drop necessarily. If you want to adopt a child, adopt his whole family. Take me in. But my mom, my biological mom, she was 16 years old, and she was in the foster system. She was adoptable. So there's just no reason for her, for somebody to take me away from her, take her future away and leave her with this huge hole. Like, what, she's just going to move on from the time she had a baby at 16? Like, come on, help her. And then that allows her to raise me. Like, just take us all in. But we want to reach into these communities, and into the hospital beds of people in need, and we want to take their future. We want to take their child because somebody else over here needs a baby. And I understand why people do it, and people will say, oh, I wanted a family, and I get that, but like, you can't have that by stealing a baby. Anyway, so that's where I've landed now. We'll see how that goes.
I mean, yeah, it's so interesting though, even in your answer there, you're offering a solution to well-meaning white people. You're like, here's what you can do.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, even though you are fiery, and I mean, it is just a great idea and would have worked and would have kept your family whole. But I'm wondering, like, do you ever think in your mind about like educating the well-meaning white person, specifically about racism or adoption? Like, how do you think about that? And is that something you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that, here in BC, you meet a lot of white folks who are really nice, except that they seem to have no idea what to do with you. And, I've lived a lonely enough life where I've spent a great deal of time, giving them the tips and the tools to not annoy me so much in their discussion of race that we can say friends. I've done that lots of times because I like having friends, and I feel like some people are really trying and they don't get it. I've dated people where I've had to do that, and I've worked at jobs where I've had to do that with, I don't know, like everybody else who's working when I am. And, that obviously I had to do that in my family. And, I've already told you about my weird manifestos. Like, I should probably not use manifestos. They were just nicely worded letters to my mom, asking her if she could maybe just find it in her heart to see where I was coming from. I do find myself doing a lot of that. And, it is exhausting. I don't want to do it most of the time. And I'm always annoyed when it comes up. I had a therapist once where I realized that for us to get a little bit deeper into these issues, I was going to have to explain some things about race to her. It's like, I need a new therapist. I don't want that to be my job necessarily. But, I also do think that the purpose of, art really is to try to explain things to people, to explain the unexplainable, to illuminate, and to help people have the words to tell their own stories. And, often it's not until we come across a term that describes something that happened to us that, suddenly we're able to say out loud just what that was. And so I think more than educating people about race or racism or how to talk to me, I wanted to give, other racialized and marginalized and adopted people the language to do the same thing that I'm doing, and the boldness to do what I'm doing. I do feel like there's a lot of education and a lot of kind of imparting that is maybe my job, but I also don't think that you're going to solve racism by teaching white people what to say or do. I think that
Right.
these problems are collective, and they require everybody working together, and not just white folks demanding that we teach them again and again and again, throughout time. We've written a million billion books about all of these subjects. A friend of mine the other day, he found a book on it was like Black women's writing from 1910, and he went through it and he was like, they solved every problem in here. Like, this doesn't seem like there's
Right.
solutions to like the growing prison population, and there's solutions to the drug problem, and there's these solutions that we're coming up with, they're not new. I mean, we've been going around and around on these issues for a long time, and people have proposed really good ideas, and we have chosen not to listen to them. I should say Black people have proposed really good ideas, and we have chosen not to listen to them. So I'm not going to get caught up in that fool's errand. I do.
It's a time suck. It would just suck all your time out.
Yeah, right. Toni Morrison said, the function of racism is distraction, and it's just so true. You spend so much time explaining yourself, and again, for me, I mean, I wrote this book, this version of it, in under a year, but still, like, half of that time was just like doing a PhD in all of the questions that are going to come up for me. So I know that that's coming. But yeah, again, I'm moving on to a different group now. I'm trying to speak to me and my multiplicities out there, all of me's across the world who know exactly what I'm talking about in this book.
Yeah, you're caught up. You don't need to explain. It's there. It's present.
Yeah, we'll start a movement and people can respond to us.
Perfect. And early in the book, you're at a summer camp, and there's sort of this discussion in battle that's like something claimed by someone else, even though you were in the room. Can you just describe what you were going through then, and what you've sort of come away with after it? That seemed to be a real struggle.
You froze up for a second, and I missed like the what event you're asking about. I heard everything around it, but it was like
the debate about being a real Black person,
yes.
Right? As a kid, this was something that meant a lot to you. Can you just take me back to that part of the book?
So when I was 14, I went to this Bible camp, Camp Square, and it was really the first time. As a result of the life that I had, that I found myself in the same space as another Black boy. And, I was very used to being the Black kid in every space I ever went into. But, I'm also, I'm biracial. And so I was a lot lighter skinned than this kid was. His name was Courage. He was from Nigeria. He was really nice. In the researching of this book, I found out that he worked at Bibles for Missions for years, and then he died of cancer at 32. The woman that actually told him that his treatment wasn't working turned out to be my ex-girlfriend Ashley, who also appears in this book. It's just the most harrowing, ugly coincidence I've ever discovered. It was really sad. I wanted to talk to Courage for this book, but in any case, he and I just we didn't get along because there was a competition between us. He was also used to being the only Black kid in every space that he'd been in, and I think of that Key and Peele sketch where there's the one Black guy in the a cappella group, and then another Black guy comes in and he's like, hey, this is my a cappella group now, it just felt like that. Like I was so used to this role that I didn't really know how to be a person outside of it, and I couldn't be the Black kid when there was a Blacker kid at the camp. And I didn't have any guidance for that, and I didn't have any language. And at that point, I mean, my understanding of what it meant to be a Black person came from, you know, what all these white folks around me, you know, were saying. So I just didn't have any strategies or insight. So the last night of camp, Courage, he gets up and he gives this big speech, just thanking everybody for being so welcoming to him. You know, he says, I was nervous coming to this camp because I was the only Black kid at camp. And, you know, I said, hey, and everybody heard and they all laughed. It was kind of embarrassing. But then Courage said, oh, I'm sorry. I meant the only real Black person. And then it was like just a huge laugh. And, you know, I was humiliated. I don't think that he actually, you know, meant to just zing me to death. But I do think that, you know, that was kind of what we both understood to be true at the time. You know, that I had this sense that I was a Black person, and then I met who we both felt was a real Black person, and you know, suddenly I was adrift. I didn't know who to be, and I didn't know what that made me. You know, well, if Black people are going to reject me and say you're not a real Black person, and white people are going to continue to treat me the way that they treat me, you know, where do I go? But you know, as I've grown, I've realized that we were both given some bad information. You know, that we are both real Black people, and you know, like there's so much complexity within Blackness. You know, so much like diversity. I mean, you know, of skin tone, but also of thought and you know, proclivities and you know, pursuits and ways of speaking and just ways of being. And we are all kind of given this public template for what Blackness looks like. But, you know, those of us who are Black know that it looks like us. And that kind of self-actualization and self-assurance and that willingness to define Blackness for myself instead of allowing the white folks around me to define it for me, you know, that came a lot later. And I wanted to include that in the book because I think that, you know, there are a lot of people who will be, you know, and smart people who will be stumped when you ask them, okay, well, what's the real Black person? You know, is this person a real Black person? Is that person? Are you? Am I? You know, is Blackness biological? Is it experiential? You know, I think it's really complicated. You know, I had a friend ask me once, you know, how can you say that you have Black pride and say that race is a construct at the same time? And, you know, that's a fun question, but I mean, the answer is pretty clear. You know, I understand that it was made up to buy and sell me, but I also know that it's a huge part of my lived experience. And, you know, there was a time when I was ashamed of that. And there was a time that I was afraid of that. But as I've grown, not only have I realized that solidarity with other Black folks is the fucking coolest, but, you know, I mean, actually, I'm just going to end it there. Solidarity with Black folks.
Amazing. And just a reminder to the folks listening to the stream that you can get Q&A questions in for the last 10 or so minutes. We'll open to the audience questions, but I still have questions for you. Earlier this year, you went through the death of your biological mom, and I'm so sorry. Where did you leave things with your mom, you know, at the end of her life, and when it seemed like we're only still getting to know her?
Yeah. I was with her the night before she died, and you know, I'll never forget it. And actually, this is one of these stories that I'm testing out telling now, but I feel like it makes me weird and emotional. But the you know, when the first time I met her, and I say this in the book, you know, I wanted to stare at her forever. Like I wanted to stare at her for the 30 years that I didn't get to. And, you know, I mean that really seriously. Every time that I was in the same room at her, I just, like, I wanted to look for way too long, you know, and see myself and and just kind of, like just fill in all the gaps. There were times there right after she died where I would panic. Like, do I remember what she looks like? Like, could I sketch her? I wanted to just burn her into my memory. And yeah, it just always felt like it's weird to stare at people. And I'd look for a little while, and then when she'd look, then our eyes would meet, and that was like intense. It's like, oh my God, those feelings. Like, I don't know what to do with this. I've never experienced love at first sight, but like like I'm just like magnetically drawn to my mom. Like, I want to hug her and I want to climb on her lap, and I just want to be so close to her. So yeah, when we met eyes, it was even more intense. So we kind of worked through that together. It was, of course, the exact same thing for her, and it was at times just really uncomfortable, being in the same room as her, because like we just loved each other so much, and it seemed like there was so much time for us to make up, and so much we needed to know about each other, in order to have our understanding of one another, I think, line up with our love for one another. So I wrote this book, and she told me her story. I sat down with her one night, and I just asked her every single question I could, and I recorded it, and I have not gone back to listen to that since. But we really just like worked our way towards the kind of relationship we wanted. And whenever it got too intense, I would say, "Hey, Mom, when 30 years from now we're talking, it's not going to feel this awkward. We'll be used to our love for one another by then." But about a month after I finished the first draft of Invisible Boy, I sent it to her, and she read it. And then she went to the doctor not long after that, and they found blood in her eye, and it turned out that she had chronic myeloid leukemia. And it took her life in a year. It took her life in 13 months. So yeah, for our last night together, she couldn't really speak. She had gone blind. She watched the second season of Bridgerton, and then as soon as it ended, she couldn't open her eyes anymore after that. And so I was able to just sit there and stare at her. And I told her, like, "Mom, I'm just staring at you. This whole time, that's all I wanted to do. It was weird. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm just gonna commit you to memory." Yeah, and then the next night, or the next afternoon, she died with my wife in the room, and yeah, it was. I mean, obviously very sad still. Yeah, we left things honestly incredibly. She called me one night before she died, and she just said how proud she was of me, for writing this book. She said, don't let people intimidate you. She said, when people ask about our relationship, just tell them it was bittersweet. So
An understatement. Oh my God.
It doesn't really feel fair to have lost her at this point in my life. After I already lost her once, and then I did all this work to recover a relationship and to push through like all of these emotional barriers that I put up, and we had to try a few times to really to just get it going, our relationship, and it was hard, and so felt like we got there. And then, yeah, we had like a few months before, before it was over for us. So I think of her all the time. I cry all the time. But, I know that she's proud of me. I know that she loves that I just wrote this shit disturbing, incendiary, satirical memoir. Yeah, and as much as she's not here with me right now, and we really had talked about that, I'm still just, I did commit her to memory, and I still do carry her in my heart, and Like the weird thing about it is I'm just endlessly proud of my grief. I feel like I'm big sad, and I'm big sad because I took the time and I did the work to get to know her, so that when she was gone, I missed her like you miss your mom, you know. So
Mm.
yeah, I think we left things pretty good.
I'm so glad to hear. I mean, having gone through, that funeral and I guess reconnecting a little bit with some extended family, and also being able to build, I guess, a bit of a community around you. Do you feel like you have Black solidarity like you described in your life? Have you achieved? Have you
Yeah,
transcended?
yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, obviously, there are any painful thing comes with all kinds of like weird new growth. That's pretty fun, pretty exciting actually. And the one thing is, I just know now, like, there's just no time to waste. Like, if I feel like, you meet people like at a party or at the park or whatever, and they're nice, and you're like, oh, I'd like to be friends with that person, but you don't necessarily follow up. You're not going to call them like, hi, I would like to be your friend.
Hmm.
And like, I do that now. I absolutely do. Like, if I'm out at the park and I meet like just like a Black dad hanging out with his kid, it's like, hey, I'm Harrison. I recently learned that life is short and that my connections to the Black community are even still too tenuous. Like, come into my life, come to my house, like, let's grab lunch, let's have a beer, let's let our kids play together, let's go, let's go, let's go. So I've done that probably too many times. Yeah, and for somebody that came from just like an all-white community and has always been pretty embarrassed that all of his friends were white, at least for the first like 20 years of my life. At my book release party the other night, just to see like, oh, this party's like half Black, like finally a reflection of who I am. It was awesome, and I feel like uh, it's made me more willing to put myself out there for relationships. I got so vulnerable for this one because it just felt like there was no other choice. And like, yeah, now I will tell another man, like, I want to be friends with you outside of this park. Please call me on the phone.
Yeah. I mean, just reading the book, you really root for Harrison, and so I feel like knowing this, after reading the book, people will be very satisfied with this outcome. So thank you for sharing that. I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A from the audience. Let me just look at what we have here. Um, how much was ADHD a part of the problem with your relationship with your parents? Or maybe how did it exacerbate the problem already there?
Oh,
Let's start there.
obviously, I'm going to say obviously, whoever has that question knows exactly how much of a problem ADHD can be in relationships. I was a rapid fire kid. And I talked a lot. I was like weirdly intelligent early on. I could read before they taught anyone to read, so I just could. And I was endlessly creative. And like, who wants a 12-year-old writing race manifestos, really? So like, I had a lot going on, and I obviously like there's a lot of the stories in the book. I mean, the emotion is dialed up because that's how it feels, when I experience rejection, or when I feel like a tinge of abandonment. These are huge feelings, and I don't just get sad. Often I get dysphoric. So I think that there were a lot of situations where, yeah, I probably got really emotional, and my mom didn't know how to deal with me. And I was an argumentative kid at times, and I mean, obviously at school I had all these problems paying attention and fitting in and so on and so forth. And I know that for people with ADHD, they'll read this book and they'll really see themselves, because I mean, a lot of my problems, I think, had something to do with that. There's a moment where I'm kind of locked in the storage closet and I'm sitting up there just feeling bad about myself. and I talk about how like a little bit of shame was actually really nice in those moments, because when I feel shame, like I lose so much time. You know, if I'm stuck in this room for a half hour and I start to feel some shame, like I'm gone. Like I'll just kind of log back in, you know, half an hour later, and it's time to leave. Like it was a really great way to just burn through the time when I was you know being punished in these lonely spaces. Um, yeah, so I think it had a lot to do with it. And I'll also just say that my mom, when I met her, obviously had ADHD. And when I met my half brother, you know, her son that she gave birth to 3 years after me, I mean that dude has ADHD. And you know, when I met my uncle Junior, her half brother, who his name is Uncle Junior, but he's 30, so he's my uncle, and he's younger than I am. It's just the funniest. But that guy has it too, man. Like they you know, it's a family disorder. And you know, often adoptees are talking about wanting to you know get their family's health history. And you know, that's become kind of a just a way for us to argue for our right to our total history. But the reality is, you know, it's not just about, you know, the cancer you might get when you're 50, or, you know, the likelihood that you'll have dementia later. I mean, it's about the context for the genre of brain you have. You know, in my family, they didn't know what to do with me. And I'm sure that I was very exasperating. My son is very exasperating. And I'll tell you why. He has ADHD, just like his dad, just like his grandma, just like her dad. You know, I know exactly how to deal with him. You argue with him a lot. You just argue and argue and argue, and you lose. That's how you deal with my son.
Yeah, he is good at getting his way. I do see that. Okay, just before we sign off though, because we've gotten so vulnerable and you've shared such, you know, really dark stuff that you've been through, I just want people to know that this is a funny book. You are funny, Harrison. And I mean, maybe it's like a defense mechanism. Maybe it's like trying to not get vulnerable at times when you're a kid. But I just want that to be known. If you have a final, like very short comment on that, please share. And otherwise, we'll turn it over.
What's happening? Am I supposed to share?
I mean, if you
Oh,
like, I mean, we have reached
I have,
time. I'm not sure.
I have something to say about this.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, you know, these stories are all really dark and they're all very sad, and like I don't know any way to tell a sad story other than as funny as I can. You know, it's like bear with me. There's a lot of jokes here, and what those jokes are going to do is they're just going to buoy you along until we get to the devastating conclusion, because this has been a sad story all along. And I've also, you know, when I tell stories like this, and I tell these stories about, you know, my life and my experiences as a Black boy and as a Black man, I'm often telling them to white folks who I know don't quite understand the, you know, the interiority that I'm experiencing, you know, or like that's going on for me, or the you know, like the way that this taps into all my other little traumas, and you know, they don't have the like the context of my life that explains why this particular thing was so personal to me, or why maybe it wasn't. And so, you know, often the reactions that I get are unserious, you know, and often these unserious reactions are like, you know, like a really nice false empathy, just like, Harrison, I'm so sorry that happened. You know, and that's great. But it doesn't really ring true. So what I've found, instead of trying to tell, you know, stories and get like a genuine, empathetic, understanding response, is you tell them to get laughs. I mean, that's another way to do it. So, you know, I wrote this book like really hoping that people would laugh. But again, as we discussed earlier, as the book went along, I just got like more and more fired up. And so I think you'll find that the humor is front loaded a little bit. And by the end, like I'm kind of just asking for us all to break the world. Like, let's go. So, in that case, I think that humor is very useful, especially when you're trying to build a coalition. Let's all make jokes, and then after that, let's go and, I don't know, storm the gates or what have you.
Yeah, we ride at dawn.
Oh, thanks, Harrison. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been such a wonderful conversation. We appreciate your time. Thank you to everybody out there in the audience. As a gentle reminder, we can't continue to host fabulous programming like this without the book sales to support it. So I have put the book link in the chat. It'll take you directly to the Politics and Prose website where you can purchase the book. PMP ships anywhere, or you can pick up it in store. And there it is. And while you're there, check out our events page. We have a lot of fun upcoming events. We'd love to see you there soon. But in the meantime, thank you again. Everybody stay well and stay well read.